appropriate to have my Duncan here.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You're allowed.
I wanted to begin by teaching you an important word in missions. It's a little bit of a dangerous word, actually, and I hope that my lightness here won't muddy the waters. But there's an important word in missions called contextualization. Okay, that's not too hard to understand what that means. It is a dangerous word because it leads to compromise in many circumstances, but there's a level of contextualization that happens in every avenue of ministry. And so what it kind of generally means is you must really understand the culture in which you're working and ministering in missions, so that if there are any maybe unintentional things that you do or say that in that culture kind of make people think of this or distract them from the essential truth of what you're communicating, then you should understand that and learn to contextualize, your presentation and your ministry. So obviously that can lead to compromise because people are like, well, they believe in gods that are in the corners of the church, so I'm going to say the God of the corner of the church. No, we don't do that. That's compromise. But in this context, I wanted to contextualize my presentation by having Duncan with me, so that you all can clearly understand that I am a person who speaks truth. Thank you, Lizzie, for your help in contextualizing. Okay, that was a bit of a stretch, but I really appreciate the request that Pastor Dan gave for me to present this. This is actually not something that I have been forced to put into a presentation, and so it really helped me. In fact, I think there's more to be done on this, so I plan to keep working on it. But hopefully this basic presentation will be helpful to you and will at least inform your mission partnerships that you have. As I see your board back there, I was delighted to look at the board. I don't think it was like that a few years back, and so it's really cool to see. Is it five different active partnerships? That's a huge blessing, and I'm so thankful for the Lord's work here to allow you guys to be doing that. And so to help inform that, and Lord willing, to see this happen someday, maybe from these. Well, maybe this is a sore subject. They're not pews anymore, but from these chairs. Okay, I need to get more of this. Stop being so corny. But from these chairs, Lord willing, God will lead somebody to serve. And actually, as in talking to Pastor, there are people serving, and there are people in ministry that have walked these halls, and we're praising the Lord for that. But my goal here is to just talk about, and the reason that I named it From the Pew to the Peoples is just the call to God's people in the scriptures to declare his name among all peoples. That says that in Psalm 67. I'm going to bring up a verse here at the end, Psalm 96. Verse 3, that talks about our responsibility to declare his name and who God is to all the nations. And that, of course, is specified and given clarity in Christ's Great Commission to go into all the world, to make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them and so forth. And so it is your responsibility. Yes, to be a light in this community, but also to reach the peoples of the world. And so we want to think of it in those terms. Well, there's a lot that goes into it, and just worked out this way that I could think of kind of 12 divisions, 12 different elements of a process that people go through. And I'm sure there are more. There are maybe even ways to say it in fewer steps than this, but this is the way it made sense to me. First of all, I would want to start with the groundwork. And I think that your pastor has and your leadership team here have a great handle on the groundwork of sending out missionaries. And what I mean by that, there's many aspects, but remember that the church has the responsibility, the local church has the responsibility both to teach and to practice Christ's commands. It's your pastor's responsibility to faithfully present the Word of God to you, and really a core of what Christ wants you to know is his mission, right? To be ambassadors for him, to be witnesses for him, to make disciples. So that ought to be faithfully preached and taught here in this gathering, in this congregation. And not only that, but it should be practiced. And that looks like being faithful here and now and every day, being faithful to make disciples here in this church, to disciple you and for you to be discipling one another, to be sharpening one another, also leading unbelievers to faith and being a faithful witness. And so a church that is faithfully teaching and preaching Christ's commands is going to be a mission-minded church. Many people ask me these days, and you know, it is humbling to be asked these questions, because I feel like I probably should know a little bit better how to answer them. And really, the reality is I've been doing this for 5 years, and I feel like it's you know, there's so many different kinds of churches from Maine to California, right? And well, we don't want to forget Alaska and Hawaii too, and in Canada as well. We serve churches in Canada. There are so many different kinds of churches and so many different maybe trends and weaknesses, strengths, you know, one extreme to the other. So it's a little bit hard to know all of the factors and to be able to answer this question comprehensively. But people ask, well, why aren't there more missionaries? You know, why does Baptist Missions, for example, not seeing as many missionaries enter the mission field as in the past? And you know, thank the Lord, we've been averaging about 12 or so, 10 or 12 new missionaries every year. We're talking career missionaries like Aaron and Rachel. We have short-term missionaries coming and going. We have even shorter-term missionaries coming and going. So we're busy in those ways as well. We have some that have more of a peripheral or adjunct kind of role. But career missionaries, 10 or 12 a year, you know, that's a lot lower of a number. I think Pastor has mentioned before some of his relatives that have come through Baptist Missions, and when those folks were entering BMM, there were classes of 40 and 50 missionaries, you know, every summer, and we're not seeing that anymore. And so people ask, well, why is that? Well, some of the answers are obvious, but for my purposes, for right now, I think I've kind of come to answer that question with this answer. The strength of our churches will determine the strength of our mission efforts. We've seen the American church struggle, right? I'm not speaking specifically of you guys, you know, just across the board. The churches like this, you know, an independent Baptist church, typically the numbers aren't just, you know, screaming out the roof. You know, they aren't seeing great increase. Now, God's working in different corners, and there are great stories of increase, and you know, COVID has had maybe even sometimes positive effects in churches, more people coming, sometimes less people. But honestly, you know, if a church is faithfully preaching and teaching Christ's commands and the Great Commission, they're going to have a healthy missions effort coming out of their church. So the groundwork is really essential. We mentioned Matthew 28, the Great Commission. Don't forget Ephesians 4 lands into a really packed context there, but just quickly, this section, this reminder that the church is there to, and God gives the gifts of church leadership in order to equip the saints for the work of the ministry, for the building up of the body of Christ. So the church is to be producing ministers, right? To be producing people that are actively at work and know how to be, that are equipped to be working in the ministry. So this is the groundwork. A healthy church, good teaching, good practice, and you know, there were some questions last night about this, and I think one thing that I see that's interesting, and I don't want to get too caught up here and get sidetracked, but is that there are churches that have great teachers, great preachers, for pastors and those that are involved maybe even in the Sunday schools and so on, that are very sharp in their theology. They know how to present it, but unfortunately there's very little practice going on in some of these churches. There's very little application of what's being taught, and that's really unfortunate. And you're not going to see a strong mission effort coming out of churches like that. And so this is the groundwork. Now I'm going to throw in a very complicated four-letter word here that I'm not going to be able to do justice to this morning, but talking in terms of the missionary call. Okay, so there's the groundwork of healthy church, and then there are cases now where God is leading people to take steps to become involved in missions. Often that's described in this term, the call to missionary service. I would kind of want to nuance that a little bit. So I don't necessarily, I'm not trying to teach you that, that you're to be, as you faithfully sit in the pew, that you're to be waiting for some mystical experience, a voice, even maybe, not necessarily a voice, but maybe you could even decipher words. I'm not trying to promote that kind of working of God. I don't necessarily believe God works in that way in this era in history, and there's a whole lot of theology. I'll let Pastor Dan deal with that one. I think he already has. But I think I came across something that either he gave me or that I saw here somewhere that he's spoken about this. But the missionary call, I think it comes in, there are four different aspects that I want to talk about briefly. Paul talks about in 2 Timothy, 1 Timothy 3. Yeah, 1 Timothy 3. Paul talks about the first verse. This is a true saying, if a man desire the office of a bishop, he desireth a good work. And so there, as a part of God's leading into missions, there is a growing desire, an aspiration, a burden. And maybe those words aren't all the same, but to me, they're all kind of related. There's this growing interest and not being able to stop thinking about what God is leading a person to do, and there's this desire. There's also the element of giftedness. So this is something that I really enjoy as I get to know our mission family. That as I get to know our missionary family, there are people like Aaron. I mean, he's not in the room, is he? Is Rachel here? Okay, I can talk about them behind her back. It's all very positive. I handpicked the houses for this weekend. I mean, Pastor actually made the decision, but he asked me, who would you recommend? This is the couple I recommend to you because I just think that they have a lot in common with you guys. You guys would connect with them. To me, they're just one of those stories where it's just like, it's like written all over them. Alaska, like this is what God has made them to do. They're just perfect for it. Now, who knows what God has in His providence, how this will go for them. But Aaron loves hunting and fishing. He loves outdoors. He loves hard work. He grew up in a rural environment. He's just made for Alaska. And we had visited Alaska last year, and that's basically each of the missionaries we met, maybe with a couple of exceptions. They're all like Aaron. They're just, and Rachel, they're just great people. And God has gifted them and equipped them for that ministry. There are other examples. We have, we'll just think of our own teammates in Romania. We have several different types of people that serve with us in Romania. One of them, Dave, is just a logistics guy. He's really good at business. He's good at details. He's good at careful thinking and asking the right kinds of questions, and he has been so useful to the work in Romania as he has helped, especially with building projects and with helping the Roma people get work and finding out answers to the complicated bureaucracy that these Roma people need to get connected to government help, and he's helped them walk through that. He watches the news constantly. He knows what's going on, and he understands the news in Romanian, which is not a gift that I had. And so you can see where Dave, my colleague Dave, was particularly gifted in gifts of service, gifts of administration, and how that has been put to use in Romania. Of course, the church planters, they need to have gifts of leadership, of pastoral ministry. And so as a person is growing in a burden and they've understood the need and they're designed to respond to that need, they and along with their church leadership evaluate their gifting and the way they would fit. And of course, we'll talk about an agency like BMM and how they can help kind of see, okay, you have these interests and these gifts, we really need somebody like that over here. But this is a part, I think, of the call to missionary service. Also, I mentioned this, but the call, so to speak, there's the recognition, there's the influence and input of other people. If somebody is, burdened for, in the sense that God wants them in, Taiwan, right? And they see where they could be put to use with their giftedness, and they have just a general interest in outreach, in evangelism, in missions, in ministry, their pastor ought to see that in them. Their pastor ought to recognize that. The leaders, the other people in the church ought to be saying, yeah, I see that, or why don't you consider ministry? It happens kind of in different orders maybe sometimes. Some people say, well, this person shouldn't step out in the ministry until the church says, you need to do this. I'm not sure I want to delineate it that way, but certainly a person shouldn't take steps forward unless their church and the counselors and the church leadership are seeing this fit and seeing this calling of God in their life. And then there's this matter of qualifications. Well, this is all wrapped up in Missionary Call. This is a big one. I think it was Linda that asked me this question while we were getting around this morning about a person's level of education required for missionary service. That's a tough question for me because, at least at Backspin Missions, we don't have like a particular, you have to have this many credits or this certain certificate or degree. We have a way of evaluating it, but there are different levels of qualifications. Character, I would start there. Character. A person's character needs to be godly. They need to have a godly character. They need to have a record of submissive, humble, trustworthiness. How do they respond to authority? How do they handle responsibilities? Are they diligent? Do they have a walk with God? Are they godly and humble? And while the qualifications for a pastor in 1 Timothy 3 and in Titus 1 aren't a perfect fit for every missionary prospect, right? Like a single woman, right, that's going to go translate the Bible. She doesn't need to meet the pastoral qualifications. But many of them should. They very, very carefully meet those. If they're church planting pastors, right, they should. And so the qualifications for ministry given in 1 Timothy and Titus can be used as reference points, and in some cases they need to be used as strict guides. But character is a important area to evaluate. Fruitfulness is also an important area to think about in qualifications. Recognizing that only God can change people's hearts, we don't necessarily measure somebody's long list of, I've seen this many people saved, or this is my resume of accomplishments in ministry. But we need to see that somebody has a reputation of ministry faithfulness. A missionary should have a passion for souls and God's work in people. And are they doing something about it? And really, what types of effects have they had in people's lives as they have attempted to minister the gospel and discipleship and in children's ministry and in whatever other ministries? Have they had an effect? Have they been useful in the ministry? And of course, the church will be the most important entity that is able to evaluate somebody's character, somebody's fruitfulness, and qualifications in this way. Another area of qualifications would be Bible knowledge. Knowing scriptures and theology is so very important. I mentioned contextualization. That was meant to be kind of a joke, but this is where Bible knowledge comes into really into play here. when, it's tricky enough, isn't it, for us to know how to answer people, right? To lead people spiritually, even in our culture that we're very familiar with, because there's so many twisted things going on, and you just don't know where people are coming from. Well, take that level of difficulty and place yourself in a foreign culture where, I can't think of a good example really quickly, but this means not hello, but get away from me or something like that. I don't have a specific example, but that's what it means. But where simple things in life could mean totally different things from the way you're used to, and then throw in some of the spiritual background that people have. Boy, we faced some challenging circumstances in the Roma village in Romania. I don't even know if I came out on the right side of the one particular instance, but there was this tradition, and we have it too. I don't know exactly if you all do it in your church, but many churches like yours will have a baby dedication, right? And maybe it's even on Mother's Day or something like that, where babies that have been born in the last year or so, the mother and father come and they ask for the church to pray for them and to just commit this child to the Lord and for God's work. Well, that also is a tradition in Romania, but it comes out of a context of orthodoxy, where the children they very religiously follow this tradition of baptizing infants. Even if you're not faithfully going to the Orthodox Church, you would still kind of claim your allegiance to the church by baptizing your children through the village church, priest and everything. Well, yeah, even there are beliefs that it protects them from sickness, that it helps them have a longer life, and so we would often get requests for people's babies to be, they use the term, in the Baptist church, they use the term blessed. Would you bless our baby? Basically they were saying, can we dedicate our baby? Can we have this prayer of commitment to the Lord for this baby? Well, I would often get requests from unbelieving families that never came to our church, that we would have that type of a ceremony for their child. And I resisted that, because I felt like, well, to them that means that they're going to have a healthy child, and that they're going to have these beliefs mixed in with that. And that caused some deep rifts in our village, kind of split the church apart in some ways and for a season. It was complicated. And so all that to say, knowing the Word of God and knowing basic doctrines even, the different classifications, the doctrines of salvation, of God, theology proper, of the Holy Spirit, of the theology of the church, of the end times, and these things, you need to have a fair knowledge, a thorough knowledge of the scriptures in order to serve in these contexts. And that is often it's great when people like Aaron and Rachel, they've been through Bob Jones, they've gotten a lot of theology in their even in Rachel's music studies. Aaron's, he had more of a broader Christian ministry, I think was his area of study, and he got a lot of that. But as Aaron mentioned last night, maybe some of the more valuable preparation for him was his service in their home church and the way that his pastor led him through kind of applying the theology to ministry. And so all that to say, we don't require that somebody have a Bible college degree to join Backspin Missions, but we do want to see that they have carefully prepared, that they have studied the scriptures, that maybe even their pastor has helped lead them through these things. We often will say, take Charles Ryrie's Basic Theology, which is a great encapsulation. I think Floyd, what's his name? Barrickman is a similar volume that is very, very thorough. It covers, all the main doctrines, and it can really help a person to get deeper in these things. Any questions at this point? So that's what I would put together in the Missionary Call: a desire and burden, a giftedness, a recognition by others, and qualifications. These kind of are wrapped up together in somebody's call to ministry and missionary ministry. So I haven't got very far. I have 10 more to go. But any questions at this point? The others are quicker. I haven't done this before, so let's see. All right. I love to hear your questions and your thoughts. These are all very practical. I appreciate Pastor Dan's insight, because these are things that people often wonder about, and it's good to be able to talk about them. Okay, so now another thing I need to say is, while some of these, and I wish I had taken the time to say, this one definitely needs to come before this one, but these aren't necessarily like, this one definitely is prerequisite to this one, and then this one's a prerequisite to this one. They may come in a little bit different order, so don't be confused by that. But prayer could be more like an umbrella over the whole thing, right? It should be. But I want to mention it as a step because it's really, I think it's so important that it's mentioned in Acts 13 in the classic missionary sending passage that I think Pastor has plans to talk about next Sunday. In Acts 13, it says, this is where Paul and Barnabas, which we would practically consider the first missionaries sent out. I know Paul was an apostle, so he had a sort of a double label there, and we're not apostles. I'm not an apostle. Aaron's not an apostle. But I think we can use this as a model that there were in the church that was at Antioch certain prophets and teachers, as Barnabas and listed these guys. It says in verse 2, they ministered to the Lord and fasted. The Holy Ghost said, as they ministered to the Lord and fasted, the Holy Ghost said, separate me, Barnabas and Saul, for the work whereunto I have called them. And when they had fasted and prayed and laid their hands on them, they sent them away. This is an essential part of the process. Decisions for sending out missionaries, for going to the mission field, should be made in the context of a local church that is praying and that is seeking the Lord's face on this matter. The individual in particular needs to be praying. A lot of wisdom is needed for a location, a field, for the timing of this, for which agency to use, and other search parameters, other factors that go into somebody's decision to enter the mission field. It's a complex and sober process that we've all probably heard the stories of failure, of teams that have fallen apart, of families that have struggled on the mission field, of dangerous situations, the list goes on of the ways that this can be such a complicated process. And so we need to seek the help of God, and we need to have his mind. I appreciate the emphasis on fasting and prayer in this. And I appreciate a couple of examples, recent examples that have really been a blessing to see from a distance. We have two different examples that come to mind. One couple had to leave China during COVID. Actually, they didn't have to leave. They left before it all kind of fell apart due to some normal circumstances. They needed to come back, do some things here. But by the time it was ready to go back, it wasn't an option, and it's still not an option. So they have been in a process of looking for what's next for them. And as they did that, they actually, in God's providence, needed a new sending church as well. Their original sending church had closed. It couldn't function anymore. It closed. And so they had a relationship with other churches, and they pursued one of them in particular. And as they connected with that church and were preparing for what's next, they and their pastoral leadership planned for different days. I think a couple of different times it was Saturday from, say, 10 to 2 or something like that. And they, whoever was willing to participate would come. They would fast during that time. They weren't going to have lunch. They were going to just devote that time to prayer together for God's leading of this couple. And interestingly, God, they don't have quite really the answers quite yet. They're still searching for what's next, but they've given this matter to serious prayer and fasting. Another recent example, assistant pastor who's actively involved in his church, a big church, and they've been there for 12 or 13 years and had been sensing for some time God was leading them to Japan. And they planned to join Baptist Missions this summer, Lord willing. Everything's going well so far, but anyway, they knew this was such an important decision that they have a large church, so that a lot of pastors and then of course deacon board and so forth. And so they asked their pastors and their deacon board if they would pray with them about this for, I think, a week, to really make this a matter of serious prayer. I think there were some fasting times that they planned in there as well, just maybe skipping a meal on a day or two, and just really using that time to focus on the Lord. And as a group, they did this, and they came back together, and they really felt convinced that God was leading them forward. And it was just such a treat to see a body of people just get so unified behind this work of God. And I think that God honored their time of prayer. Okay, need to keep moving here. So prayer, and then a fourth step would be the church. Now the church should be involved kind of even before this, but I do want to make sure it's mentioned that for Backspin Missions, if a person doesn't have the blessing of their church, then we really cannot help them. There's a limited amount of things that maybe they could do, go to participate in a baseball ministry or something like that. But even then, we're wanting a pastor to kind of sign off on it. And really, when it comes to a particular missionary effort, this is the responsibility of the church. This is Acts 13. Antioch was sending these gentlemen out, and that is a priority that be in place. And there are official things. In our world, we ask that be a matter of congregational vote, that the church vote to commission. We have a kind of a twofold process. I'm just speaking of Backspin Missions. We want the church to both authorize Backspin Missions to kind of work through an application process and onboarding process with missionaries. That's called church authorization. And then the commissioning is, I look at the church authorization as kind of a pre-commissioning, and then the commissioning is that official Acts 13. They laid their hands on them and sent them out, and that has to be in place before they leave for the field. And so, maybe you are here and say, "Yeah, I want to go. I heard about this great ministry in Honduras, and I think I'm going to go there for 2 years and serve. I have this little window of opportunity." And you could easily, and this happens constantly. You could either just book a flight on Expedia, pack your bags, and you could call that missionary service. But if you haven't worked through your pastor, your church, and kind of sought to have accountability and God's part of this effort, I would question whether or not you're really doing missions. And so, sorry to be a little hard-nosed on that. Maybe that sounds rough, and it comes across rough to people. I try to say it more graciously than that. But having the blessing of your church is really essential to the missionary effort. Okay? I haven't gotten very far, but let's see here. Number 5. Seek help. Seek the help of a mission agency. And nowadays, honestly, there are other organizations that don't necessarily consider themselves mission agencies that are also there as kind of parachurch organizations to help provide a particular resource. But mission agencies are useful in the fact that they have been doing kind of the whole picture from the pew to the field. They've been helping people for decades, and they kind of understand the various elements and aspects of the process that need to be thought through and to be planned. And so, agencies, as I said, are a service to the local church. We are not, sometimes we maybe get careless and call ourselves a sending agency. We don't send any missionaries. Backspin Missions doesn't send missionaries. The churches send missionaries. We serve the church in that process. Just like you might, some churches will hire. Maybe this isn't a great parallel, but they'll ask for help from an audit firm, right? Can you audit our books and just help us with a different level of accountability? You're hiring the services of an outside organization to help you accomplish God's mission for you. Other ways that you bring in help. You can do this with mission agencies as well. I suppose it's not a great parallel because there's a little bit more involvement that a mission agency has than just doing a checklist of finances and then giving them back to you and walking away. But an agency will help with team and field placement. Like I said, you have a person that is, maybe they're a nurse. They have a particular burden for teaching English and skill in that. They love working with young women, and they would love to help reach people through basketball. Maybe these four kind of interests and skills, right? Well, we can kind of filter that and think through that and say, well, hey, there's a team over here that they have medical ministries, they have sports ministries, they have a great need for somebody to step in and help this church planner with the women and the girls in the community. and we help find a place for that person. That's a lot my job, and I use the help of my field directors and so on, but it's really exciting to see that process happen, and we're thrilled to be able to get involved in that way. And then as somebody explores the help of a mission agency, they're comparing their options. I don't love this aspect because, of course I want people to come with BMM, but there are a long list of mission agencies to choose from. We go to conferences like Aaron mentioned, Bob Jones University, we show up and there's just a slew of them, and they're great brothers and sisters. We all kind of know each other and laugh and tease. We do get a little jealous when somebody goes to the other one, but we have to check our hearts on that. But these are all ministries that are doing a great job. Pastor and Betsy work with ABWE, have a lot of friends that I've been connected with that agency. They, along with us, have been doing this for quite a long time, and they have their own kind of niche and their own, list of services that maybe even go beyond our list of services. And we have kind of maybe some different approaches in other areas, and we have, areas of the world maybe that we've been in place, or we have Bible institutes, or we have, so you kind of shop around to a certain degree. And this is part of the process. And it's important for a missionary candidate to ask a lot of questions, and their pastor. Asking questions about doctrinal agreement, about field function. How does that team operate in that field? Who makes the decisions? What if the pastor and the missionary committee have this preference? How does that fit with what the team and what the board is doing? How about finances? What are the different aspects? How do you guys, what are your financial policies versus this group over here, what's their financial policies, and so forth. So this is all part of the process of seeking the help of an agency. It's kind of a daunting thing, and we try to help people. We try to make it easier for them, but it's something that is an important decision. And by the way, there are people that go without a mission agency, and there's nothing in Scripture that says that's wrong. Maybe there are some. Well, that's kind of another talk. So I just wanted to recognize the fact that happens, and it's not like they're sinning. Anyway, what I mean by transition here is this transition away from somebody's kind of life, the way they have been living it. Not so much their morality, but their work, their responsibilities, their place in J. What is this couple doing in J? Or this individual, and how are they going to transition from that to raising support and getting to the field? That's a tricky process, and we try to give people information and coach them a little bit, but each family has to make their own decision. Aaron and Rachel decided to cut the ties pretty quickly. That is commendable. I've seen that fail a little bit, not for them, but for others. I've seen that kind of come back to bite somebody where they're like, I left my work a little too early, now I got to go find some part-time work at Target or something. And that's happened, that's okay. But often that is a really advantageous way for people to do it because they're just free to make the contacts they need to make. God rewards that faith that they step out in and provides through churches like this and other churches that have them in. But that's a tricky decision for each couple. Oftentimes people will work to a certain point, 20 or 30%, and then they start cutting the ties with their occupation and they're able to go out on the road. Sometimes people have online work, and that's really nice. They can kind of keep going and doing their thing while they report in from time to time online. We have all sorts of circumstances, and it looks different. And then there's the support raising process, this process of developing partnerships. We tell our missionaries, don't treat the support raising process, pre-field ministry, there's all sorts of names for it, deputation. Don't treat it like, looking for a place that you can use as an ATM, a no-fee ATM, like, oh, I know that church, they'll help me out, put in your numbers, okay, I need 300, okay, thank you, bye. It's not an ATM, it's a partnership, it's a relationship. And you guys have done such a great job of developing that relationship. You make it so much easier for the missionaries to have that mindset because you really do want to get to know them. You really care about, the different aspects of their interests and how they met each other and those kinds of things. That doesn't always happen. And often there are churches that are tempted to just fill up the board in the back with names of people they support, but they really don't know them. We have supporters on both ends of the spectrum. And we could do more to try to get to know those churches, but sometimes, honestly, there's, should I go here? Yeah, I can. Already committed, okay. There are times where when we came back from, even on furlough, and then came back from the field, we'd contact the church. Hey, we're back, we'd love to come report. It's not like it would be that hard, it's not that far away from where we normally travel. No, that's okay, we don't need you to come back. So, okay, well, they faithfully send in $150 a month.
Wow.
That's good, we like that, but wish we could know them a little bit. We wish we could understand kind of how things function there. You probably had the same, Pastor, but anyway, it looks all different ways. But we try to encourage our people that this support raising process is about developing partnerships. And then there's specific training often that is required, cross-cultural training, language, we did a course in how to learn a language. It wasn't Romanian, it wasn't a course in Romanian, it was how to learn a different language. We spent, 2 weeks, I guess it was, doing that. That was a very helpful training. There are others that will do specific security training because they're going to a high-risk area that maybe is a little bit of political threats or threats from opposing groups. And they have to learn kind of how to plan, contingency planning for protecting their family and so forth. There's other training unique to different fields. And we try to use other organizations that kind of specialize. We do some of our own, obviously we do some training of our own that we can provide through people like, we were talking about Steve Galt. Steve is a guy who was born in Africa, served in Africa for a few decades, and now serves as the coordinator for Africa and Europe. And he has a set of, training that he provides to our missionaries unique to his kind of areas of expertise and others that contribute. So there's this phase of training. It's really important. Some people are just, just hard workers, and they feel like, I can do this. I've looked it up online. I watched YouTube videos about how to survive in the Amazon, and I've learned a few things, and I got LL Bean down the road. I'm going to just get all this stuff and make sure I'm ready. I guess they're more for northern environments, but whatever. They've shopped around. They've gotten their equipment, and say, I can do this. And maybe they can, but that's kind of ignorant. It's kind of arrogant, thinking that they have all that they need to survive or to work in that environment. And so we trust that people, at least, we do get some pushback sometimes when we ask people to do certain training, and normally it works out, but sometimes they just insist that they don't need it, and we can't necessarily make them, so sometimes we back away, and then they regret it. That happens. And sometimes they don't regret it. Okay, next set of 4 here. I think we're on the home stretch. The departure. So I don't have anything written here, but this is a pretty big deal. First of all, how does a person know that they should depart? The question was asked yesterday about support. At BMM, we ask people, they come to us and we say, okay, you're going to need this much money to serve in Brazil. Here's what it all represents, retirement, ministry vehicle, whatever. And so we expect them to raise that amount of money. We wouldn't have set that amount if we didn't think that's what they needed to serve there. And so at least at BMM, we require people to raise 100% support. Now they need to be making decisions, in the 90s, 80s, 90s, they need to start making plans. So we understand that. But normally when somebody gets in the 80s and 90s, they're pretty definitely going to get to 100. But there's those decisions. And then there's just even family decisions. I know I was anticipating, like, okay, we get our support, and a month later we're gone. And I actually don't quite remember how it worked, but I remember our administrator, Vernon Rosenau, being like, whoa, Travis, listen, you need to understand, this takes time. You got to send your stuff ahead. You got to think through this and think through that. Mom and dad need some time, and so forth. So he kind of carefully led us through making that decision. Do you remember how long it was?
I think it was, he said
3 months?
90 days.
90 days, yeah. So, and I guess I am speaking about foreign context most of all. Forgive me for that. There is, the Aaron and Rachel, which is somewhat of a foreign leap, but your pastor, they were under missionary status and moved to Maine. Well, they were in Maine already, right? But anyway, that happens oftentimes in a more of a gradual process. But anyway, these are all involved. And then, the departure is surreal. It's exciting, but it's a bit sobering, and there are tears. Not to point the finger at our situation and call attention to us, but we were leaving. Becky's father was in a wheelchair and had needs for all kinds of care. He couldn't do anything for himself. There's some backstory of stuff that was going on in her family that was really heartbreaking. There were young nephews and nieces. I have brothers and sisters with kids, my parents, aging grandparents, all these things. I'm not saying like, oh, feel bad, but these are significant things that you get on a plane, and you're not planning to be back for 3 or 4 years, and you know that a lot changes in that amount of time. We had little kids. Grandma and Grandpa faced the reality of not being there for birthday number, whatever it was, 6, 7, 8. That's hard. Some of you have experienced that. You have kids that live far away, and you understand that. But those are all part of the departure process. But God is faithful, and He blesses and He provides. I wish our parents could give testimony. Maybe that's a good idea for a conference, to have parents and missionaries contribute in some way. God did some amazing things in our parents' lives. So there's the departure. There's normally space that's needed. Arrive, get your legs about you, get used to the place a little bit, and take some time. And as soon as possible, within the first month or so, set up language training if it's a new language that's needed. I appreciated Aaron mentioning that in his circumstance they don't have to do language training, but he needs flight training. So there are kind of initial things that need to be figured out and committed. You need to commit. The people need to commit to a process, right? Of not just thinking they're going to start a church, in the first 2 months. There's an acclimation time, and there are people in coaching that is provided that help people know what exactly that is. But language learning is vital, it's an utmost priority. We were told, and this is what our mantra was that our ministry was language learning in the first year or year and a half of time in Romania, and that was such a vital part. It does take time. It's painstaking. It feels bad when you feel like a 3-year-old in an adult world, but God is faithful and He helps us. We were able to eventually function and converse with people, and it applies to the whole family. This is tricky. You see. Again, I know I'm talking about foreign context with a new language, but you see oftentimes where, and I understand it is vital that a church planting husband, for example, to be prioritizing language and really getting the language well so he can communicate in their heart language, the gospel, theology, establishing the foundations of how a church works. That's all really complicated stuff and important that man have the language well. But it's really important that mom and wife and kids also have a plan of language acquisition, or else they just want to stay inside and stay on Facebook all the time, where they can connect with people and they're not out making friends and having relationships in the community. So for us, Becky and I basically just had the same language track. I did probably more stuff in the Bible, and I was kind of using scripture and praying and faster than she was, because I was up in front and trying to get used to that. So I maybe advanced in that way, where she actually advanced in some of the questions about food and stuff. I was like, honey, that's you, because you remember the foods more than I, because I didn't remember names of foods, berries and how you buy cheese or whatever. Like, she had that stuff all ironed out, even if she had to go to 5 places to get 2 different kinds of cheese. Anyway. No, not because of her incompetency, but because that was just like, oh, we like Swiss cheese. Well, they don't sell Swiss cheese at the normal store. We gotta go over here anyway. So it's important. The kids, I feel bad about this, but we didn't take the kids to language school. We just said, Because we threw them into school, and they had to kind of pick it up more of an organic way. And wow, I feel kind of bad about that, but they did amazing. They did amazing. So they actually did. We went. Their initial school was a preschool that was English Romanian. So it was a popular school for the locals because they taught them English, and all the families want their kids to learn English. Well, that was helpful for our kids because the teachers knew what they wanted to say in English. But just because they're Romanians, they operated most of the time in Romanian, and so they heard plenty of Romanian too, and they picked that up. And then Sam only got a few months of that, and then we threw him in the deep end, and he was able to tread water pretty well and learn Romanian in the Romanian school. And Kara had a little more practice before she had to do that, but that's important that the family get the language. All right, I'm not leaving much time for questions, but cultural acquisition as well is vital. You know, a person needs to go in, and this is tricky. I mean, you can imagine yourself. I mean, some of you guys, just looking at you guys, are very, qualified people. I don't know much about you, Tyler, but as far as your background, your occupation and stuff, but you guys know how to live and survive in Maine, right? You guys are Mainers are strong people, right? You guys know how to do life. I mean, you're not going to be really dependent on a lot of people. And so it's hard for us Americans to go into a context like this where we have to be the learner. We have to be a servant to people and not just insist that, no, I'm going to plant my garden this way, and you're not going to tell me that that's wrong, right? I mean, we had some weird things like, why are you putting that over there? We had these very insistent neighbors like, why are you telling us where to put our plants? But, and we didn't really know what we were doing anyway, so we were like, yeah, okay. But, you have to be open, you have to be a servant, you have to be humble, you have to be patient, and this is all part of learning a new culture. But it's essential, as I mentioned before I started with. And then ministry is the last. It takes, it seems like it takes quite a long time to get to this 12th step. And it can be daunting, it can be frustrating, but it comes, and all the preparation is worth it. Ministry on the mission field is why you go, it's why you're there. And of course, you can be ministering all along the way. You can be sharing your story, sharing God's grace, sharing God's love, all along the way, building those relationships. And so there's ministry that happens. Deputation itself, pre-field ministry, it's a ministry, right? So that shouldn't be forgotten. What Aaron and Rachel are doing is ministry. They have ministered to you. Their story ministers to you. Their attitudes, their way of life is a ministry to you, and it's a sharpening, it's a discipleship tool. It's an evangelistic tool. As people meet them, like, why are you guys, oh, you're from South Carolina, why are you in Maine? Well, this is why we're in Maine, so all sorts of ministry. But what I'm talking about, this is field ministry, this is the reason you go, and it happens. And it's important that it's biblically faithful ministry, culturally appropriate ministry, and reproducible by national believers. This is another reason why just preparation and learning from others is so important, that you can't take Cornerstone Baptist J, Maine, and take this model and the way you do weekly ministries and your schedule and pastor's routine. You can't necessarily take that to whatever, Vietnam, and expect that will work. So it needs to be measured and understood that if I do this, is this something that the national believers can do themselves eventually, that they can be trained to do and carry on? A baby bottle drive, that probably doesn't work in Vietnam. They don't have crisis pregnancy centers. I've made fun of that. I hope you guys, I don't get the wrong idea. I love that effort. It just came to my mind. Sorry about that. Anyway. Any questions? Yeah, Mike.
Have either you in the last 5 years or Backspin Missions, I'll use the Houts because they're here and
Yeah.
Nathan in front of me.
Yeah.
They're sending, say all of a sudden you start getting an uneasy feeling, you got like, something's not right. And then you realize either a couple of their doctors not right, or they're sending churches like in left field in a couple of places, and you even had to say, whoa, we need to stop this process, or we're sorry, we can't.
That particular example I have not dealt with, but I know it's happened for sure. Yeah. And so those are difficult but real situations. What I've had to deal with is when the deputation never takes off, and 4 or 5 years and 20%, and you've got to say, the pastor's not necessarily willing. You kind of think the pastor should probably be a part of this, but he's looking to you and you're like, guys, I'm sorry, but we're going to need to look for what God would have next. That's really hard. That's the hardest thing I've done so far in 5 years. I had to do it twice. But that other, I haven't dealt with, but yeah, it happens. We try really hard to vet it on the front end, but.
No, probably you could refer to after they're on the field, and that isn't your responsibility, but the other administrator's responsibility, having to say, you have to leave the field because of moral failure or something.
Oh yeah,
And that does happen.
that happens actually more than we like to think. Yeah. Yes.
So in that scenario, like he said, as far as they know it, up to that point, like, they were following God's will, and that 5 years was spent on trying to get on the field, but then it just was shown that, no, but God wanted to go through this for some reason, or would it have been, you guys weren't really.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's my perspective, and most, we don't necessarily move ahead if the pastor doesn't have that perspective. If the pastor says, BMM, please, I see that God's working, I want you guys to let them keep going, we would most of the time submit to that. But we would see it as, this is mysterious, we don't know God's purposes, we trust that you can try to trust him and follow him to what's next. Oftentimes they don't see it that way. And that makes it harder. Yeah, I had another thought, but I don't quite remember what it is. But yeah, there's heart rate. Something that, from an agency point of view, we have to keep in mind that there are other supporters invested, right? There are people that are investing in ministry, and it's irresponsible to that body of supporters to just blanket, oh, well, we don't know, just keep going. It's an unwise, use of money and time.
Follow-up, probably an easy one. How long, on average, does it take to get to 100%?
Yeah, it does vary depending on the field. If somebody's raising support for the U.S., it tends to take longer, maybe 4 years. We're seeing for foreign missionaries about 2 to 3 years right now, at least in our experience. BMM favors a church model where they're out recruiting support among churches. It's not restricted to that, but that's kind of the emphasis. Others will emphasize more individual donors and meet with individuals and groups of individuals. And that maybe is faster to raise the needed support that way, because you can meet with individuals all throughout the week. You don't have to wait for the pastor to finally give you permission to come to the church. And yet that has its weaknesses, and I don't, anyway, that's a big topic too. So. It wasn't an easy question. I made it a hard question. Was there a question over here? Okay, I've gone over time, so thank you for your interest, and thank you for the opportunity, Pastor.